At the outset, I would like to thank the AOS group for giving me this opportunity to talk about diabetic retinopathy. Diabetic retinopathy, as all of you know, India is the leading country in the world now to have most diabetic population. That's why it is very, very essential for us to handle the diabetic retinopathy. And especially in developing countries, if you compare with the developed countries, the age of onset is much younger, 45 to 64, compared to the developed countries where it is above 65 is the most common presentation of severe grades of diabetic retinopathy. And in India, again, the prevalence is very high. If you see 40 million diabetics, and it's by 2030, 80 million is likely to be afflicted by diabetes. And in rural, it is not very rare. That is what we need to really understand. And implications of diabetic retinopathy on visual impairment is very, very high. And if you see, for a very brief period, I will go on to the systemic aspects of diabetes, because as they comment, we don't see into the systems. We also comment, they don't see into the eye and diabetic retinopathy. The cardiac effect and the cause of death is most commonly because of the cardiovascular disease. Almost 50% of the patients die of cardiovascular disease. So one need to understand that there are symptoms which need to be looked for in diabetics, so that you will see, and most of these patients are asymptomatic. Even while developing MI, they are asymptomatic, there may be slight sweating. But most common occurrence in diabetics of cardiological etiology is dilated cardiomyopathy, which can enhance the ischemic aspect of the diabetic retinopathy. And blood pressure control is also very, very essential in diabetics. It can't be 140/90 or more. It is 130/80 is the target blood pressure which we need to be targeted. And diabetic feet, many of us neglect to examine when the patient is in the clinic. If you see, the numbers are alarming. It is almost 60 to 70% of diabetics will have some form of feet neuropathies. And in this, 25% of the diabetics will have foot ulcers. And if you see the amputation rate, 25% of the diabetic foot ulcers will have amputation. So by examining the feet, you are almost avoiding amputations, so that the patients, diabetic patients, can have a healthy life. These are the dry ulcers of the diabetes, which can go for years together unless you address properly. And this is a gangrene, which again requires a foot angiography, and then maybe an angioplasty need to be done in these patients if recognized very early. And to prevent diabetic feet disorders, I would tell you people also need to understand the footwear importance in diabetics, which is very, very essential. And there are other systemic derangements in diabetes which need to requires attention. Is diabetic nephropathy, which can be detected by microalbuminuria, anemia, which can worsen the diabetic retinopathy. Umpteen number of studies have shown effects of anemia in worsening diabetic retinopathy stages. Then lipid derangement, especially for diabetic macular edema, it has been clearly shown that derangement of lipid profile is very, very essential. And now if you see the diabetic retinopathy proper, there are two types of diabetes mellitus. It is IDDM or NIDDM, and with duration is the one of the most important risk factor. And in IDDM, the occurrence of diabetic retinopathy occurs much faster and earlier. So if a 5-year-old or 5 to 10 years, almost a quarter to half patients are having some form of diabetic retinopathy. Whereas NIDDM, almost up to 16 years, it is only 60% of the people. It do not mean that you neglect NIDDM, but IDDM patients should be followed very, very carefully. And if you see the diabetic retinopathy prevalence in India, Among the diabetics, almost 30% of the people have some form of diabetic retinopathy. So it's all the more important for us to advise for a direct screening of all the diabetics which you know or which you come across. Now, ETDRS classification is the most important classification for diabetic retinopathy. There are several number of classifications which you can go through the books. But understanding the ETDRS classification is very, very essential. And more important components of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy is presence of microaneurysms, intraretinal hemorrhages, hard exudates and cotton wool spots in mild diabetic retinopathy. Whereas when it comes to severe and very severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, three important aspects, that is intraretinal hemorrhages, venous bleeding and IRMA, intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. These are the things you need to note down. Because in the clinic you may think that it is very difficult to classify, but if you understand the simple principle of classification, you can easily remember this. Like intraretinal hemorrhages of severe nature. Severe means in any quadrant more than 20 retinal hemorrhages. In all four quadrants, if it is there, then it forms one of the criteria. Venous bleeding at least in two quadrants. If it is there, then it forms the second criteria. And IRMA at least in one quadrant. Any two of them are present, it would be very severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. One of them it is severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And anything less than that is mild to moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, where the follow-up is not that important. Follow-up is more important in severe and very severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So here I have shown you a picture where angiography there is showing a lot of capillary non-perfusion areas, which also come under severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy when there is no neovascularization, which is not been classified in ETDRS. However, you need to remember this aspect while evaluating the patient. And this is important because of this fact, because in the first 1 year of follow-up, if it is mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, only 1% will convert it to proliferative stage. Whereas over 5 years, only 15%. In case of severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, at 1 year follow-up, almost half of them are likely to go into proliferative stage. That's where it is all important to recognize very severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Now, if you see the diabetic maculopathy, this very many people really do not understand at the postgraduate level that there are types of maculopathies there, and it is important to recognize them. Second, most of the people also ignore the classification of clinically significant macular edema, which are very, very essential. In this, focal macular edema is any small area of retinal thickening associated with hard exudates. Cystoid macular edema can be one type of diabetic macular edema. Ischemic maculopathy, where the blood supply of the central macular area got affected. A diffuse diabetic maculopathy is very, very common, and it is bilateral. Whenever there is more than 2 disc areas of diabetic macular edema, that will be called diffuse diabetic macular edema. And a combination of any of them, like cystoid macular edema along with diffuse diabetic, or ischemic maculopathy along with diffuse diabetic or traction maculopathy, can be present. And with the introduction of OCT, you can see the tractional maculopathy is more recognized nowadays. And here if you see, there are a lot of microaneurysms along with surrounded by hard exudates. And the areas of maculopathy is significant here, though by definition of CSME it is not coming into under the definition to comply CSME. Such patient still requires immediate treatment. And this patient is having a loss of blood supply in the central area, which is confirmed by the angiography, fluorescein angiography. Now, another aspect of diabetic macular edema is systemic derangement. If you see, previously I told anemia, hyperlipidemia, nephropathy, hypertension. These are all can worsen the diabetic retinopathy as well as diabetic maculopathy. And this patient, it's only by systemic control has improved very well. And this is the OCT documentation of this patient. If you see, there is a severe thickening of the macular center with visual acuity of 20/80 and 2100, and over 8 months its vision is improved to 20/25, and macular thickness also improved far better. So it is not only injections or laser that is going to work, but a good systemic control is very, very essential and an important parameter while treating these diabetic macular edema. And vitreomacular traction is one thing which everyone need to recognize, because certain times if you do blindly laser, the traction can worsen. Like this is the first picture, and traction has worsened after panretinal photocoagulation and a macular grit. This got relieved only after a vitrectomy to relieve the traction. So, while dealing with diabetic macular edema, one should do the initial investigation and typify the diabetic macular edema. You need to understand what type of diabetic macular edema you are dealing with. Unless you understand that, you are less likely that you can give a effective treatment. So, if it is focal macular edema, it is very well amenable for photocoagulation, though future it may prove that injections may be useful on a longer run, but at this stage focal photocoagulation is just sufficient. And ischemic, there is no effective treatment as up to date. Vitreomacular traction is a clear-cut indication for surgical intervention in the form of pars plana vitrectomy and ILM peeling and relieving the traction. Cystoid macular edema, where anti-VEGFs and steroids has a better role compared to any other modality. In diffuse diabetic macular edema, after systemic control, if it still persists, you should see whether there is a PVD or no PVD. Depending upon that, either surgical intervention or injections of steroids or anti-VEGFs can be considered. If this is not responding after repeated injections, probably you may have to take up this patient as well for surgical intervention. Now we will move on to the proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Whenever there is a neovascular process, then it will be called proliferative diabetic retinopathy, where it can be early proliferative, high risk retinopathy, or advanced proliferative diabetic retinopathy. In the early proliferative is the one stage one need to be very careful in examination in the clinic, because this is the stage where you can miss and the patient can have a bleeding while before even coming for the next follow-up. So whenever there is a large size hemorrhages which are above a small retinal splinter hemorrhages or microaneurysms, you need to subject them for a fluorescein angiography to rule out neovascularization in these patients. And you need to be careful in examining the disc. Here you can see very faint disc neovascularization here, which can be picked up on fluorescein angiography. In early proliferative diabetic retinopathy, the management is laser photocoagulation, which is been clearly shown by both DRS and ETDRS studies. However, a reserve treatment is anti-retinal cryopexy or pars plana vitrectomy in cases which do not respond to repeated lasers. And there is a taut posterior hyaloid where persistence of neovascularization can result. However, each stage of diabetic retinopathy, systemic status need to be improved uniformly. Panretinal photocoagulation means one need to be near tight laser photocoagulation need to be given in these patients. Otherwise, the effectiveness of panretinal photocoagulation would not be that great. And whenever these patients come, you should always see whether the laser photocoagulation is effective or not effective. And this effectiveness can start from 2 weeks, but complete effectiveness can be assessed at 3 to 4 months period. And if the neovascularization is not responding, probably you need to subject them for angiography, and then you may have to supplement either with laser or with other modalities I have enumerated. In high-risk proliferative diabetic retinopathy, where there is neovascularization of the disc, either 1/4 to 1/3 of the disc area, or neovascularization of elsewhere with more than half disc area, associated with or without preretinal or vitreous hemorrhage. This is important stage of proliferative diabetic retinopathy because this patient can bleed at any given time, and you should not lose any time in treating this patient with panretinal photocoagulation. This is a glaring example of high-risk proliferative diabetic retinopathy, where if you see the macula perfectly healthy, vision cannot be less than 20/20 vision. However, if you see the neovascularization, it is all over. All the periphery neovascularization is there. Even if you tell the patient, he may not understand. So it's always better to sit with the patient, show the photograph, and say, this is what you are having. Almost a bomb shell is there inside, and it can blast any time. This need to be emphasized so that appropriate treatment can be given at exact time. And proliferative diabetic retinopathy with CSM, clinically significant macular edema, it need to be simultaneously treated, but depends on which is more important or less important. Especially when laser is done for CSME, there will be temporary edema will be there. And if PRP is done, there can be worsening of CSME, so spacing need to be given. So whenever you are asked, first of all, it's better to treat the CSME and give some time before going for panretinal photocoagulation, unless the condition of the patient allows for it. Now we will go on to the indications for vitrectomy in proliferative diabetic retinopathy or high-risk advanced diabetic retinopathy. Most common indication is non-resolving or recurrent vitreous hemorrhage. Persistent neovascularization, as I told you, after maximal photocoagulation or cryopexy is second. Proliferative traction or rhegmatogenous detachment in PDR is third. Premacular fibrosis. Vitreomacular traction, even in non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, it forms an indication for surgery. Persistent macular edema, which is resistant to all other modalities of treatment, you need to consider vitrectomy. PDR with premacular hemorrhage is other. So I will go through few of the examples for these surgical indications. If you see here a tractional detachment with lot of fibrosis, which is very effectively treated. If you see all the fibrosis is been cleared, here silicone oil is giving the reflexes, but it is totally clear of all the membranes, so that the post-operative course can be more stable. This is another example where you can see the traction here and everything is been relieved. This is a traction and rhegmatogenous. You can see the hole here. This has resulted immediately after the panretinal photocoagulation. So one need to be very, very careful, especially when there is a fibrovascular proliferation, where exactly you need to laser and how to stay away from the areas of fibrovascular proliferation is very essential. And this is premacular fibrosis. Here, if you see, the fibrosis is mainly centered around the macular area. The periphery is more or less clear. And such patients can effectively be retrieved. After surgery, it's improving to very good vision in this patient. And a premacular hemorrhage in a young adult, YAG hyaloidotomy can be the treatment. However, in diabetics, the posterior hyaloid is very thick and it is difficult to perform a YAG hyaloidotomy. And this primary pathology is neovascularization, and that need to be treated simultaneously. Keeping all that in view, a pars plana vitrectomy would be a better option compared to a YAG hyaloidotomy in these patients, which can effectively be treated, and we can give a stable eye with a stable vision for a long term. And anti-VEGFs has a role in proliferative diabetic retinopathy whenever there is a significant fibrovascular proliferation, and it need to be considered at least a week or 10 days before the surgery. However, one need to ensure that this patient is fit for surgery before you inject anti-VEGF agents. Anti-VEGF agents would regress all the vascular activity that is present during the surgery so that the surgery can be relatively bloodless in these patients. And this is the patient, same patient, post-operative, first post-op day, which is with this amount of less hemorrhage, with that much of fibrovascular activity is very, very difficult to achieve unless we inject anti-VEGF agents. And this is very, very essential that when to examine diabetic patients, especially when diabetes is diagnosed before 30 years, by 5 years of onset, one should have a dilated fundus examination. Above 30 years, whenever the diagnosis was made, it should be examined. Fundus need to be examined thoroughly. While pregnant, first trimester is the time when you need to subject the patient for dilated examination. And depending upon the stage of the diabetic retinopathy, again, follow-up is, these criteria are given by American Academy. None are minimal retinopathy, and annual checkup is just sufficient. Mild to moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy and no macular edema, 6 months to 12 months duration is just sufficient for follow-up. Mild to moderate, but macular edema is there, then early maculopathy. It is not that clinically significant macular edema, early maculopathy 4 to 6 months. Moderate to severe NPDR duration will come down to 3 to 4 months. And during pregnancy, follow-up need to be every trimester. And when comes to treatment, very severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, early proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you should consider treatment, which means in the immediate course of time. However, high-risk proliferative diabetic retinopathy, clinically significant macular edema, you recommend treatment. Recommend treatment means you should tell the patient same day or within next 2 or 3 days, you should start the treatment. If you see the risk factors in diabetes which prognosticate the patients, it's mainly baseline characters like severity of the retinopathy and visual acuity at presentation, glycosylated hemoglobin, HbA1c levels mainly, diabetic nephropathy where microalbuminuria can have a role, or severe forms of diabetic nephropathy. Low hematocrit value is anemia, which is been proved, and more triglyceride levels, low serum albumin. These are the factors which are associated with poor visual outcomes or prognosis in these patients. Then this is very, very essential, especially the effects of intensive therapy in IDDM means a good control. It highlights the importance of good control in diabetics. It helps us in a very on long-term basis. Over 80 years, the risk of progression by 3 or more steps in diabetics is reduced by almost five times if the intensive treatment is started at the time of diagnosis. However, certain times the patient may be not on intensive therapy, and it was suggested in between. Even then, the benefit of almost 3 times benefit is been shown. What is intensive treatment in IDDM? At least 2 to 3 times doses of insulin that is been stressed. Insulin pump would have been ideal if it is available. In conclusion, diabetes mellitus and diabetic retinopathy assuming global epidemic proportion, and it can lead to life and sight-threatening complications, and good control and regular follow-up is the key to prevent both deaths as well as blindness due to diabetes. Ophthalmologists should be prepared to handle all stages of diabetic retinopathy. More importantly, the general ophthalmologist, 90% of the diabetic retinopathy early stages can be handled, which need to be stressed, because you need to give the importance rather than saying that, okay, refer to retina specialist, because it will overflood the retina specialist. who need to take care of the advanced stages of diabetic retinopathy. So their time is very valuable, and it need to be subjected to very good concentrated effort in advanced stages of diabetic retinopathy. With this, I would like to say thank you for this opportunity, and if there are any questions, I am happy to answer.